If you've ever felt like you were losing yourself in a relationship, like you couldn't quite trust your own perception of what was happening, today's conversation is going to give you language for that. My guest today is Eddy. He's been a licensed clinical social worker, an attorney, a mediator, which means he spent his entire career looking at high conflict relationships from every angle. He is the author or co-author of over 20 books, including Splitting, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. If you want to know how to find the language to describe what you're experiencing or learn to communicate effectively with high conflict people, Bill is exactly the guy you want to hear from. So let's get into it. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining me today on the Restoring Resilience podcast.
Glad to be on with you, Chelsey. Looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, of course, I'm very familiar with your work. I know many of my audience will be as well. We're going to get all into the BIFF method and your newest book and everything. But I just wanted to start with something that I think so many people in narcissistic relationships experience, and is that feeling of just being trapped, of not even being able to have language for what you're experiencing and what you're going through. So can you walk us through just how that erosion happens of your sense of self, your sense of self-trust, and what is it about a narcissist that chips away at our ability to recognize what's happening?
Yeah, I really think it has a lot to do with that. As humans, we're very social. And so what our opinion is, what other people's opinion of us is, our status in the group, in the community, in the family is highly important to us. And most of us see cooperation and equality as a good value. We get to exchange and feel good and help other people feel good. But narcissists, in many ways, I think of them as one of the ancient personalities that's really stayed in the human gene pool since we had a world where it's dominate or be dominated. And so they kind of automatically, and some are born with narcissistic tendencies, some come from child abuse or actually childhood indulgence. And so by the time they're adults, they really see themselves as superior and other people as inferior. And so in order to keep propped up that feeling of superiority, they have to put people down. And the person they put down the most is their partner. So they could be very charming and wonderful, love bombing and all of that to get into the relationship. But then to maintain their superior sense of self, they start putting you down. And what happens is the repetition, and I think of it as the emotional repetition, you're no good at this, or no one else will want you, and those kind of messages with repetition and with emotion chip away at our self-esteem. And so it's the ongoing process that makes it get harder and harder to get out, because you don't feel like the world will accept you, and maybe you really, all these things are true, maybe you did make a mistake. And when I work with clients who've been in this kind of relationship, they're still so self-critical at first that, well, I made a mistake, so I guess. And it's like, you're allowed to make mistakes. All humans make mistakes. So it's that emotional repetition in isolation. I actually call it my ERII theory, ERII. Emotional repetition in isolation makes your self-esteem get worse and worse and worse. So I think that's what keeps people trapped and what the process is.
Absolutely. And I love that framework. I mean, two things that really stand out that you were talking about is how we are such social creatures. And I think who we think we are is a lot of times influenced or affected by the people around us and what we're getting back.
Mhm.
And that's normal and that's natural. I mean, that's part of, how we find our identities and who we are. We find our
Right.
people. We find people we resonate with. The problem when you're surrounded by a narcissist is you are always looking into a distorted mirror. They are always giving something back that's not actually true, not actually you. So you're never really getting to see an accurate view of yourself.
Right. You're getting their interpretation of you, which has to be negative to make them superior. It's a
Yeah.
vicious cycle.
And we want to compromise. I was thinking as you were sharing, a lot of survivors, the number one personality trait among survivors is agreeableness. We love compromise. We want to collaborate. We are sympathetic, we're empathetic. So you go into a relationship assuming that those are good things and they are, but you can't imagine that you're with somebody who's going to exploit those good things.
Hmm.
So there's so much going on in the relationship, so many emotional strings that are keeping us tied there. But it's not even just the emotional side. I mean, there are real practical things that are keeping people stuck in these relationships too. So, what do you see as some of the most common external obstacles, whether it's legally, financially, logistically, that are keeping people feeling stuck and trapped?
Yeah, so it is legally, financially, logistically, but also what I run into a lot is it's friends and family that say, "Oh, he's such a nice guy. Why don't you try to stick it out, try to work it out, compromise some, and so it's the wrong messages. It's not like, we'll help you. You're a good person and you're losing self-esteem in this relationship. So it really depends. And a lot of times people are afraid to say what's really going on, especially if there's physical abuse involved, is they don't want people to know they're a victim of domestic violence. And so everyone goes, well, why? Why would you split up with this wonderful guy? And they hesitate to say why. And so friends and family may reinforce staying put, try to work it out. And of course, there's also some religious groups that say, the man should dominate the family and therefore you have to accept his dominance. And that's really counterproductive. There's a lot of women leaving situations like that struggle with that. So not that all religions have that approach, but some do.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody watching, my cats like to make a visit every episode, so just don't worry about that.
As long as they
But
listen closely.
they are such good listeners. They are probably narcissist experts at this point. Um, but yes, what you're describing, it's funny. I was just talking in my grounding group. I have a community and we have grounding groups or support groups.
Great.
And we were just talking about how if it was just what the narcissist did to you, the manipulation, the betrayal, the gaslighting, that would be enough. That would be bad enough in and of itself. But it never is. Narcissists recruit people in, they bring in other people so that your family, your friends, your church gets infiltrated too. And then weaponized and used against you. So it's the smear campaign that goes on. And if you're talking about church, narcissists definitely exploit so many spiritual beliefs. So, in
Hmm.
particular, so many Christian values to uphold their abuse in the relationship.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's not just churches, but also what I find is volunteer organizations reinforce, hey, he's one of us, so get along. A lot of nonprofit organizations that have a higher purpose. And it's like, as long as he says he believes in the higher purpose of the organization, then we'll tolerate everything else that they do. And so there's chunks, big chunks of society where tolerance is built in for this kind of behavior. And so that makes it harder for people to move out of the relationship into a community that doesn't support their action. And that's why communities such as yours are so important, where people find, yes, there are people that understand I'm a good person and that cooperation and compromise are good things in equal relationships.
That's right. That's so true. In um, communities, nonprofits, all those places I talk about communal narcissists, the ones who from the outside look saint-like. I mean, they just look so
Right.
sacrificial. And you're like, I can't imagine that this person would be manipulative. And so if you're in that organization, I think, we talk about if you could think of it like a circle, the closer you are to that inner circle of a narcissist, the more harmed you are. And then the
Yeah.
further away that you get, the more they look like their image. So if you're trying to get help from the outside world, it's very challenging, which goes into my next question about, let's say that somebody is able to do all that hard work. They're able to actually get the strength, get the resolve to be able to leave the relationship. And then sometimes, as the survivor and other people think, okay, good. You're out, you know, dodge that bullet. Great. Get over it now. Now just move on. So, and that's just not the case. So, what are some of the more immediate, unexpected challenges that people are going to run into right after leaving that make it so hard to actually stay gone and stay disconnected?
Yeah, I think it's making new friends, it's finding new settings, maybe even finding a job. Now there may be more need for self-support if the narcissist was supporting for a while. Um, there's so many logistical things that it can be like, well, it's easier if I just go back. We had the house, where am I going to live? All of those kinds of questions are challenges. And if your headspace is still self-doubting, then you go, oh, should I live here? Should I live there? What should I do? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't believe myself anymore. That it's like making all those decisions with the old mindset of being an inferior person. And so I think one of the biggest things is support groups, is getting the message that, I am a good person, I'm a strong person, I can get through this. Yeah, I made mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, and I can survive and thrive. So it's the daily life challenges with the headspace of self-doubt that make it so hard. So you got to attack the self-doubt right away.
Yeah, and that self-trust, that's something that I work with
Right,
people
right.
so much on. I mean, because you can know all the things. And I think sometimes that's the downside of living in this, information overload age that we all
Hmm.
live in. You can Google anything and you can find the information and find the resources, but then you're just overwhelmed and stuck and paralyzed because you're like, there's so many options and I don't trust myself and I don't know how to practice discernment or, making decisions. And so that's definitely a challenge after leaving the relationship is now it's like it's all you, and your sense of self has been eroded. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. A woman was saying the other day to me, she says, I don't know what kind of music I like. Can you imagine that? And it's like, yeah, because you were taught you're supposed to like this kind of music because that was his music. So everything may feel like a challenge, but the first thing is, like you said, building the self-trust. Replace the self-doubt with self-trust and know you don't have to be perfect. You can experiment, try things, change. Um, that's what we end up doing as humans, and it's okay.
Right. That's right. You can be curious. I tell people
Yes,
like
curious.
curiosity is wonderful. If you don't know what you like, that can be very overwhelming to the point I don't know what food I like, what music I like. That's okay. Just be curious.
Hmm.
So what about if somebody is listening and they're still in the relationship, like they haven't left yet? What's a piece of advice you would give to them to start building that resolve if they do want to get to the point where they can leave?
I think one of the first and easiest places and most important places is your self-talk. And it's kind of like we've been talking about, once you're out, you have to rebuild a sense of self-trust. But even when you're in the situation, is to come up with two or three short phrases that give you encouragement that you can tell yourself, even when you're being criticized, so that you can slowly start building your self-esteem back and your ability to make your own decisions. And what's fascinating, we teach with High Conflict Institute, we teach what we call encouraging statements, which is essentially affirmations. But what we teach is to come up with like two or three encouraging statements and then play them over and over again in your head. Remember emotional repetition? Well, that can work in a positive way. And if you're being criticized and you're playing that in your head, let's say you're playing in your head, I'm a very good mother, I'm a very good mother, I'm a very good mother, and your partner's saying you're a terrible mother. If you keep repeating that to yourself, it's actually louder in your head than the criticism that's coming in. And when we role play practice this, which is real easy to do, um, people say, wow, it hardly affected me what he was saying, that, in the role play. It's like I heard my voice louder. So it's a really subtle, simple, and powerful thing that people can do no matter where they are.
I love that. And it's repetition. I always say we believe whatever we're most familiar with.
Hmm.
Whatever is most familiar feels most true. So if you're most familiar with self-doubt and criticism and questioning yourself, then that's what's going to feel true. I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, I can't do anything. And the only thing I would add to that is seek out the evidence. So
Hmm.
affirmations without evidence, that we often have that part that will talk back and like, no, you're not. You're really not good enough. You don't know about this, this, and this. But if you can put together that affirmation and evidence. Well, I did this. I picked up the kids. I do all the laundry. I do the grocery
Hmm.
shopping. I do like just list out the things you're doing that you are very likely taking for granted because survivors do not give themselves enough credit for all the things they're doing.
Right.
And the narcissist is also always pinpointing all the things, you're quote unquote not doing or not doing well or not doing right. So if you can also reorient to what am I doing? What do I get done in a day? That can be very helpful as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great thing to point out. Hmm.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears for a moment or just maybe expand this a bit because for a lot of people listening, kids are involved. And that just adds like an extra, another layer of how do I communicate with this person, whether I'm still with them, whether I'm not with them, when kids are involved, because I can't just leave. I can't obviously go no contact or never talk to them again. So, of course, you have created the BIFF method, brief, informative, friendly, firm. I love the acronyms. So, can you just explain to us what that is and how it can really help somebody when they're dealing with a high conflict kind of person?
Well, it's brief is typically, let's say you get an email, let's say you get a two-page email saying how horrible you are, you're doing everything wrong, blah, 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 blah. And so it's brief, which is typically just a paragraph, 4 or 5 sentences at the most. Even if you're responding to 2 pages, you don't need to respond in detail like that. Informative is just straight information. So you don't need emotions, judgments, doubts, or defenses, etc. And ironically, when you defend yourself emotionally, it reinforces to the person that you had to defend yourself because you did something wrong. So if you just skip over that and just provide some information, and so that's informative, then friendly is just, thanks for letting me know your concern, or have a good weekend, or something. Really, it doesn't have to be much, just brief. And a lot of people who have been um, targets of blame and narcissistic behavior, etc., feel like, why should I be nice? And it's like, just be civil, you know. And then firm means basically end the hostile conversation. And if you have a question, is ask for a response by a certain date and time. Because a lot of times you just don't get that. The other person ignores you. And if you don't get a response by certain date and time, then you'll know to move to whatever your plan B is, what else to do. So you're not just waiting around for someone that's not going to respond. So let me give a quick example. Let's say parents are separated and narcissist says, you're a horrible parent. You don't know what you're doing. You don't communicate. You really should communicate better. And when and where is the school play tomorrow? And I just can't believe I have to ask for this information. You should tell me right away. You should be a good parent. You should be a co-parent. And that those kind of words get thrown around as weapon. And I can't believe I have to ask for this information. You always do this. Okay, so you get an email like that. Here's a BIFF response. Thanks for letting me know your question. The school plays at 2 tomorrow in the auditorium. Maybe I'll see you there. Goodbye. That's all you have to do. You don't have to defend any of that other stuff. Ignore it and just be informative, slightly friendly, like thanks for your question. And that's the end. That's it. And it's so much easier. You don't spend a lot of time worrying about, how to answer every single thing that was said. And people feel so relieved. Now, I want to add quickly one thing, and that's AI. A lot of people are now starting to have AI write their BIFF responses. So they'll go on ChatGPT or Claude or one of those and say, write a BIFF response to this hostile email. And AI knows about BIFF responses, but they don't mention my name even though I developed it. They'll just come back with a BIFF response. But what you have to remember is you're getting a BIFF response based on the universe, not based on your situation. And so it's not really, it may be decent, but you can do a better one. And I want people to develop what I call their BIFF muscle. It's like going to the gym. With practice, it gets easier and stronger. And you wouldn't have AI go to the gym and work out for you, just like you shouldn't have AI write your BIFF responses. Write your own. After you write it, ask yourself the 10 questions. And we have the book BIFF for Co-Parent Communication. And next to last chapter are 10 questions to ask yourself, or you could coach someone else and ask them. Ask yourself those 10 questions. See if you make any changes. And then if you want, see what AI would say. But you need to practice it yourself. Then you'll get stronger and easier and less emotionally hooked by it.
I love that. And thank you so much for referencing the AI because that is just in our, I mean, I'm on the side note, I'm afraid that we're all just like AI back and forth. We're not even having real conversations anymore.
Yeah, who wrote this?
Exactly. You're like, what, which AI wrote this? What AI am I talking to? But that's very true. And you know your situation better. So
Right.
AI does not know your history. They don't know that person. And that's very true. You want to, I mean, talk about self-trust and building back your sense of self. You
Hmm.
need to trust yourself because what about if you're in person? What if you're on a phone call? What if you're in a meeting with a teacher and this narcissistic co-parent is there
Hmm.
and they attack you? You can't be like, hold on, let me get my phone and, type in AI how I want to respond to this. You
Right.
want to have that muscle built so that when you're in those situations, you're also teaching your nervous system to be calm because you kind of have to have that prefrontal cortex online to be able to think through a BIFF response. And so I think just even practicing doing that, you have to become more regulated.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and you're very insightful to pick up on that because we're getting feedback now that people say that writing BIF responses changes their whole relationship with the other person. Instead of thinking emotionally now, they think more strategically, and that they go, how can I get an answer to this question rather than how can I fight with the other person or persuade them and or compromise all of that. So it builds people's confidence, it builds people's ability to do strategic thinking. And and we didn't realize that at first, but people kept saying, yeah, now I approach verbal conversations. And like you said, talking with teachers, bosses, etc., you start thinking a little differently about how to communicate. So
Yeah.
you're rewiring your brain in a good, strong way.
And I always tell people you're not having a real conversation when you're talking with a narcissist because you're dealing with somebody who really isn't able, willing, capable, whatever, of seeing that other perspective of going, oh, yeah, I can see how I influenced you and you influenced me. And here's where we're having a disagreement. It's not a real conversation. Just like the great example that you gave of when is the school play. That's just a way for them to try to feel powerful and to try to gain control. It's not, they don't really care what time the school play is. They could ask the teacher, they could ask anyone what time it is. It's not about that. It is a weapon, it's an opportunity to try to abuse you. So
Hmm.
you don't need to get bogged down in the details and how should I respond to all of this or what's this about. It's about whatever the narcissist wants in the moment. So you
Right.
just need to keep it, like you said, brief, informative, friendly, firm. Um, and going a little bit further with the legal and the co-parenting aspect of things, I know a lot of people in these spaces are also going to court, having legal battles, having custody battles, and we are not supposed to use the word narcissist. So, how can you describe what you're experiencing with this parent without telling a judge or a lawyer, "Hey, they're a narcissist"?
Yeah, well, this is fascinating also, what seems to work. So I represented clients in family court for 15 years. And what I slowly learned is when you're dealing with a high conflict person on the other side, and I see narcissists and other personalities as high conflict, they're preoccupied with blame, they communicate emotionally and with a lot of repetition and simplicity. What I learned is they hook often the judge's emotions, and the judge frowns at your client or my client. It's like, but that's not true what the judge is hearing. So what we've learned is you have to be, just like with BIFF, you have to keep it simple. And what I recommend is you talk about three patterns of behavior that are most concerning. And so with a narcissist, often undermining my parenting or mother's parenting. And I might mention, I don't know if any of your listeners are men, but men also may be the target of a narcissist and
Absolutely.
abusive behavior. So undermining mother's parenting or undermining father's parenting is one of the most common. And then lists like three or four of the strongest examples of that. Then another common pattern may be emotional abuse or yelling at the children. Another may be inconsistent, highly inconsistent parenting. Maybe they like show up and they're real intense one day with the child. You've got to do your math homework. You know, I'm going to stand over your shoulder. And then the next day is like, I don't have time for you. So maybe those are your three biggest patterns. And if there's physical abuse, that may be one of the patterns, pattern of physical abuse with three worst examples. I describe this in my book, Splitting, in chapter 14. And the title of the chapter is Presenting Your Case. And the idea is without saying someone's a narcissist or borderline or sociopath or whatever. So it's the three most important patterns. Then put your information into that so you keep repeating. Here's another example of undermining my parenting. Here's another example of making false statements to the court, if that's what's happening. Because some people, it's the false statements. So use your knowledge of the narcissistic personality, but don't say, and by the way, he's a narcissist. That should tell you everything. Judges say, that doesn't tell me anything. I want to know what their behavior is. And don't call names. That's what they say. So,
I know it's frustrating when you're actually trying to use real terms and it's not name calling. It's, it's a real personality and perhaps disorder. But I love that because you're taking something that feels so complex and multi-layered and putting it in columns. And then
yeah.
you just like it just builds on your case. So when you're talking to, a judge, it's like, here is another example of this, judge. Here's another example of this. Instead of it's this, it's this, it's this. It's
Right.
very in its silo and it just feels like, oh wow, they are really making their point. I can see how this person keeps doing that.
Yeah. Let me just add, you also need to have a category of what you're doing well. So,
Mm,
I'm the one that's, gone to the parent teacher meetings. I'm the one that's gone to the doctor appointments. I'm the one that's done this and this. So that the contrast is there because the other person will try to define you in negative terms. There's four things, three patterns of the other person that are concerning, and they have to be related to parenting usually,
hmm
or to whatever decision is coming up. If it's a financial decision, maybe they lie about finances. You want to point that out. But you also need to point out that basically, you're complying with the law and the orders and what you're supposed to do. And that's what I see so much is one person complying with what's expected and the other blaming, blaming, blaming.
That's very true. And to not get caught up in the, correcting the record, like you're always on the
Right.
defensive. If the narcissist is going to come at you, but if you don't want to just refute, you want to have your own things that you're like, no, I'm doing this up front.
Let me add some because that's a really good point. You're bringing up these really good points. Because what I've learned, and this took me like a decade in family court to learn this, is the judge absorbs the story of what's going on. The first person that gives the judge a story, the judge latches on to. So if the story is that you're a lousy parent, then the judge is focused on you. And you can say, I'm not, I didn't do that, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And the judge is like, yeah, well, you're still a lousy parent. Maybe you didn't do those things, but the story is you're a lousy parent. You need to tell your story. And your story is what's going on here really is this person's angry because I left him and he's doing this, this, and this to try to punish me. And that's what's really going on here. Now the judge has two stories and has to kind of sort out what does the evidence support, your story or his story. And maybe there's some support for both, or maybe it is really that he's harassing you and you're doing everything right. But if you don't tell your story and put it in the frame of a story, the judge, no matter how much you refute the story about you, the story still stands. And most people don't know that. Even most family lawyers don't know that. They're like, my client didn't do that and didn't do this and didn't do that. But unless you get the story out, all of this is because he's really angry and trying to punish me for leaving him. Then the judge starts thinking about him, not just about you.
Mm. Yeah, that's such a great point. I think a lot of survivors going back to just their an agreeable personality, so they think
Right.
I just need to go in and tell the truth. I'm just going to tell the truth and I'm going to be believed. And the unfortunate reality is A, that's not how it works in court, and B, narcissists believe they're so entitled they believe that their word stands as truth. They don't need evidence to back it up. So they'll just say things, and like you said, whoever's story gets out there first, you don't want to be caught just trying to poke holes in that story.
Right.
You want to, it's kind of like being in a relationship with them. You can't argue with an unreality. So you can't try to
Hmm.
poke holes in their gaslighting when their gaslighting is completely
Right.
not based in reality. You have to just tell a completely different story, you
Yeah.
know, in order to
And
make
you
your
can
case.
say this that's not at all based in reality. And here my story. This is the reality. And here's the evidence. You got to have evidence that fits
Right.
your story.
Right. Well, before we wrap up here today, I want to get into your newest book, which is called SLIC Solutions, SLIC. Can you tell us what that's about and how it's going to help somebody, whether they're in or out of a narcissistic relationship?
Yeah, this is very exciting because what we've realized over the years is one of the biggest problem areas in dealing with high conflict people, narcissists and others, is setting limits on them because they ignore your limits. So the SL is setting limits and IC imposing consequences. That when you're setting limits, you need to think of what are some consequences that I can use to support this limit. So if they ignore the limit, I can say, well, if you keep doing that, I'm going to have to do this. Now, the title of the book is Setting Limits, a subtitle, Setting Limits and Imposing Consequences in 2.5 steps. So people go, all right, Bill, what's a half step? The half step is, do you give them a statement that shows empathy, attention, and respect while you're setting your limit? Or don't you? And about half the times you want to do that. Like with a child, you say, and Johnny, I'm teaching you this because I want you to succeed. Or an employee. But if you have someone who's manipulative, and often people who are narcissistic are manipulative, you don't want to do that because you'll say, well, I can empathize with you, but I still have to impose this. They'll say, you don't empathize. You don't care. If you cared, you would do. No one thinks you're a caring person. Look at blah, blah, blah. And you get into an argument about your statement. We call them ear statements, empathy, attention, and respect. You get into an argument about your ear statement. So just don't bother with that. Just set your limit and impose the consequences, or let them know what the consequence will be if they ignore the limit. And sometimes you just set the limit, like, let's say they come late to pick up the kids, and you say, please come on time, and they keep coming late. So you have to think, what's the consequence? Well, I have things I have to do. So if you're more than half an hour late, I'm going to leave with the kids, and you're going to have to meet us where we are at the shopping mall or at my job or wherever it is. So first you can say, just please come on time. But when that doesn't work, then you say, I'll be leaving after half an hour. Or I'll talk to my lawyer about changing the parenting plan. And sometimes the threat of that itself is enough. Sometimes you then have to talk to the lawyer about changing the parenting plan. Because if someone's chronically late or even misses parenting time, and narcissists are really big on looking good at court but not following through. And so you should keep a record, and you may need to go to your lawyer and say, here's the situation, now we need to make a change. So it's setting limits and imposing the consequence, sometimes with an ear statement, sometimes not. And the book gives a lot of examples, including divorce examples. It's a generic book, so workplace, community, family, etc. Parenting, teenagers, two examples with parenting teenagers, because setting limits and imposing consequences, that's one of the most challenging areas, especially in the age of all this online stuff. But that's what the book's about.
And that is so needed. And I assume that the consequences are something that's within your control, something
Has
that
to
you're
be.
going to do.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So we have 5 questions to ask yourself about imposing your consequence. So and I forget the order of the questions, but things like, does it fit the problem? In other words, like taking a cell phone away for 24 hours versus taking it away for a month. Have you considered positive consequences, especially with kids? You want to say, if you do this, this is a benefit. But even with a co-parent, sometimes, look, if you do this, then I'll help you with that. Um, am I ready to impose my consequence? Maybe I don't have the nerve to do it. Um, and do I need to get help imposing the consequence? And then there's a fifth one, which I'm blanking on right now. I have to look at the book again.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a great. No, that's wonderful. Because when I teach about boundaries, I often talk about how boundaries are more about authenticity, like
Hmm.
you being ready to you want to approach a conversation where you can look back and say, I'm glad I handled it that way.
Hmm.
I am proud of the way that I responded, rather than how can I say this so that, because those are things literally out of your control. So very much like you're, imposing consequences, you have to make sure that the consequence is something you're ready to do, you feel is within your values, you feel authentic to you, you have the capacity to do it, and it's something you can do. You're not depending on them to,
Right.
you don't need their agreement. Like this is the consequence you're going to impose that makes you feel safer, more respected, whatever in the relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got to have control over it. It's not, don't count on persuasion,
No,
especially with a narcissist.
no, that's a losing battle for sure. Well, it's been so wonderful chatting with you. My last question I ask every guest, just keeping with the theme of the show, is what's the one thing someone can do to begin restoring their resilience today?
Well, I'd go back to the self-talk and think of a couple short phrases that give you encouragement. I'm a very good mother, or I'm a reasonable person. I can succeed. I've succeeded before. Those kinds of things. Um, Other people, my family thinks I'm great, uh, or my kids love me. All of those. But pick 2 to keep repeating to yourself, because you can do this wherever you are. Just tell yourself, even when you're being criticized, tell yourself this stuff. That'll give you a lot of resilience.
Absolutely. Yes. All right. We'll link all of that in the show notes. Bill, thank you so much for being here. I learned so much, and I'm sure my audience did as well. Where should people go to find you, find your books, all those things?
highconflictinstitute.com,
Wonderful.
www.highconflictinstitute.com. So we've got the books, we've got videos, we have free articles, probably, I think we have 300 now. Um, but we also have some classes. We have a second website called conflictinfluencer.com, and how you can influence how the conflict goes. So we have classes there, and a lot of people find that helpful. We also have an online parenting class that's helpful, and usually you can get credit for it if you're in a family court case. We have it for divorce and separation. We also have an online class for intact family. Sometimes, people may not be ready to leave, even though they're thinking about it, and that gives you some skills too. A lot of stuff at the websites.
That sounds wonderful. That'd be very helpful. All right. Well, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chelsey. Really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us and empowering us with the exact language to describe what it's like to be in a narcissistic relationship and how to communicate without losing yourself. If you benefited from this episode, please like this video and subscribe to get notified of new episodes. And as always, I want to remind you that no matter where you are on your healing journey, resilience can be restored. And we're going to keep building it together. So I'll see you in the next episode.